Good day, it's Constantine. This is a tutorial on how to use the Roland SE-02. Now we'll have a look at every knob and function that it has. It's an analog synth, meaning that it uses analog circuit to generate the sounds and effects. The only digital part is this delay section right here. Now for most of you that know your synths, it resembles the Minimoog with the 3 oscillators and the 24 dB ladder filter. Now, but it has some interesting functions as well, such as the digital delay here and the 16-step sequencer. It's a very small synth, 30 centimeters by 13 centimeters, and it only weighs 950 grams. Now, there are a lot of complaints about the size of the knobs, but it's a small compromise because you get portability. Now, don't let the size fool you. The sound is very powerful and it's an excellent synth for both beginners and pros. Now let's start by turning it on. Before turning the unit on, always be sure to turn the volume down. So if you follow this line from between control and oscillators, the volume is back here. Now, but even with the volume turned down, you might hear some sound when switching the unit on or off. This is perfectly normal, it's nothing to worry about. Now when powering up, turn the SE-02 first and then the connected equipment. When powering down, turn the connected equipment first, turn it off, and then the SE-02. Now, there are 3 modes in this synth, song, sequencer, and patch. In order to browse through the presets and create our own patches, we have to be all the way up to patch. Now, in this mode, you can either browse through the presets or push the manual button over here to create our own sounds from scratch. Now, you can, of course, save the sounds as a preset, but we'll look at that in a bit. Now let's completely reset the synth for starters because we need no modulation or effects. I'll start from this side. Glide all the way down or just put it on off. This is not very important at the moment. Let's do the same controls for all the oscillators. Right, 16, fine tune roughly in the middle. Let's do sawtooth. That in the middle, sync is off, keyboard is up. This doesn't matter. Cross modulation all the way down. Oscillator 1, yes. And then turn 2 and 3 down in the mixer. No feedback, no noise. Cutoff all the way open. No resonance. And then for both envelopes, no attack, no decay, and sustain all the way up. Keep tracking, let's leave it down. Control all the way down. Normal. Modulation trigger up. Release off. This should be at gate, and turn the LFO down as well. Put all of these switches down and no delay. So right now the only thing we're hearing is oscillator 1 in sawtooth. Okay, the mixer. Now this section controls the volume of each oscillator. One knob for each oscillator. Now when we put all the way to the left, it completely turns the volume of the oscillators off. Now, of course, you can blend different oscillators in different levels. For example, if I put oscillator 1 in sawtooth, and actually let's tune them first. And then put oscillator 2, let's say, in pulse wave, I can just blend them in and create unique sounds. Okay, feedback. Now what this does is whatever sound we have created, it takes it and feeds it back to the input of the filter. Everything except for the delay. This can make for quite aggressive sounds. Here we've got noise. This knob adjusts the volume of white noise that we want to blend in with our sound. Now white noise is all the audible frequencies in the same intensity. I can blend in with my oscillators. And since this is a noise generator, I can just produce white noise without the oscillators. So if I turn down all of my oscillators, I can just have noise. And of course I can filter it as well. And if I play with the envelope a bit, I can just make it sound a bit percussive. Like a butt sounding snare. Okay, let's have a look at the oscillators. Now make sure oscillator 1 in your mixer is turned up. Now the SE-02 is a monophonic synthesizer with 3 oscillators. Now even though you can only play one note at a time, you can still mix 3 different sound sources. So the controls are the same for each oscillator. So let's start with the first one. We've got range, where you can change the octave. So if you set it low, it will produce a very low pitch that can be used to apply modulation. And the rest of the octaves. Next to that, we have fine-tune control. Now there are 2 reasons for that. In analog synthesizers, the tuning might not be 100% the note you're looking for. So you can use a tuner and adjust with a fine tuner. And the second reason is when you have more than one oscillators playing at the same time, the tuning one by a bit produces a cool effect and makes the sound a bit thicker. Let's have a look. Now next to that, let's turn oscillator 2 down, we've got waveform. Now here we can choose from a triangle, narrow triangle, which is a waveform that combines triangle and sawtooth, and that's the reason why it's between these two. Sawtooth, square wave, wide pulse wave, and narrow pulse wave. Let's go back to sawtooth. Now oscillator 2, I'm going to turn it up. It's exactly the same as oscillator 1, but the exception is that the fine-tune knob has a wider range. Now we've got oscillator sync from this switch here. What this does is it makes oscillator 1 the master oscillator and oscillator 2 syncs to it. Now when both oscillators are playing at the same time, their waveforms might start and develop from different points. So when oscillator sync is on, then every time the master oscillator's waveform cycle starts over or repeats, then the synced oscillator, oscillator 2 in this case, will be retriggered and follow oscillator 1. Essentially, in easier terms, we are forcing both of the waveforms to start together at the same time. Now this produces a rich sound that can also change the timbre of it. Now let's hear the difference between off and on. So both oscillators are on. Let's tune them first. Okay, so sync off. Now, by changing the fine-tune of oscillator 2, we don't change the pitch, but the timbre. Now, if I bring oscillator 1 down in the mixer, so we only hear oscillator 2, when I change the fine-tune of oscillator 1, then the tuning of oscillator 2 changes. And remember, this only changes the timbre. Right, so next to that, we've got envelope 1. This knob controls the amount of modulation that is applied to the frequency of oscillator 2. Now, when it's at 0, it has no effect. Rotating to the right, we change the amount of modulation applied, and rotating to the left, we invert the polarity of the envelope. Now, let's look at an example. So in the filter section, we have 2 envelopes, filter envelope and amplitude. Now, the filter envelope can be used to modulate the pitch of oscillator 2, and we can use this knob here to adjust the amount. So, let's go to the right. Let's have some longer attack. You can go crazy with it. And counterclockwise universal polarity. Oscillator 3. Now the same controls apply here. Let me turn it up in the mixer. But as you can see, the waveform section in this oscillator looks a bit different. So instead of narrow triangle, we have a reverse sawtooth. Now, another function in Oscillator 3 though is this keyboard tracking option right here. So right now it's on. When I play notes in my keyboard, you can hear the pitch changing. And it follows the keyboard. But if I turn it off, then this becomes an independent oscillator and it no longer tracks the keyboard. So any note that I play will be the same. Of course, the range and fine-tune still affect the sound. Next, as you might have seen, there is no sine waveform in the oscillator section, but there is a way to produce a sine wave in this synth. So what you do is turn down all of the oscillators, so we hear nothing now. And then in the filter section, turn the emphasis all the way up, and then use the cutoff to control the pitch. Now, right now, it will not follow the keyboard. So if you want to use equal temperament and use the sine wave and play with the keyboard, you have to turn key track on both switches. So now it follows equal temperament. Now let's turn the oscillators back on and down. Now, XMOD. We will have a look at this a bit later when we look at the mod wheel options. And lastly, as this is an analog synth, the temperature and passing of time might affect the pitch, and you might need to retune the oscillators. Now, the SE-02 has an automatic tuning function to correct the problem should it happen. Now, we need to be in patch mode. We already are. And then what you need to do is hold down transpose and press click on the value knob. I forgot to mention this, but this knob is also clickable. So when you press it, it will start saying start tuning. If you want to go ahead and use the automatic tuning, press the value knob again. Otherwise, press exit. Let's have a look at the filter section now. This is your EQ. It is similar to the Mini Moog filter, and it's a 24 decibels per octave filter. You can essentially think of it as a 24 dB slope low pass filter. Now, when it's all the way to the right, the filter is open and we don't subtract anything from the sound. As we move counterclockwise, we slowly start taking away the higher frequencies. So this knob controls the cutoff frequency. Next to that, we've got emphasis, or what is known as resonance, and it's used to boost the frequencies, meaning to add volume at the point or near the point we set off the cutoff frequency. Now, technically, the cutoff frequency is at minus 3 dB from where we start cutting. Next to that, we've got key tracking. This controls how the cutoff frequency will change in relation to what note we play. For example, when key tracking is off, which is right now, no matter what I play in the keyboard, the cutoff is consistent, and sometimes you can barely hear some notes. So, for example, now if I turn 1/3 key tracking on, then the cutoff frequency changes by 1/3 of the pitch change. So now when I play the note up here, you can hear it much better. If I turn 2/3 key tracking on, then the cutoff frequency changes by 2/3 of the pitch change, and you can hear the note up here even better. If I have both switches up, then the cutoff frequency changes by the same amount as the change in keyboard pitch. To make things simpler, when this function is on, the cutoff is adjusted and opens up the filter by the amount we set here, and follows the keys we play. So you play higher notes, the filter opens up. You play lower notes, the filter closes down. Here's with and without key tracking. Now let's have a look at the envelopes now. As I have already mentioned, this synth has two envelopes, filter envelope and amplitude envelope. Let's start with the amp envelope. Now as you can see, you have a knob for attack, decay and sustain, but no knob for release. The release can be engaged by flipping the switch up. So when this is on, then the decay knob becomes the release. Now if I put on 2, it controls the release for the amp envelope. If I put on 1 and 2, then it controls the release for both envelopes. Now let's have a look with the release switch off. Pretty standard, and then if I play with it a bit, you can create some good percussive sounds, like a plucky bass. And turn it back up. Oh, let's see how the release works first. So I have to switch it on 2 to control the release for the amp envelope and make the decay knob my release. So now let's have a look at the filter envelope. Now this is used to modulate the cutoff. Now the contour here controls the depth of change produced. Think of it as filter envelope amount. It controls the amount of filter cutoff modulation. So as you can see, this switch is connected to this knob is connected to this switch here, the normal inverted switch. This controls the polarity of the envelope. So here it's set to normal, and down here we simply invert the polarity. Now let's make it quite evident here the filter cutoff working. So I'll bring the sustain down and just play with the attack and decay knobs. Of course, use the contour to set the amount. So you can clearly hear it open up and close. Let's try inverting the polarity. Now, modulation trigger. Now, when this is on, the filter modulation we have created will restart every time I play a note. But when it's off, it doesn't restart. Just plays the first time. Now the release, just like the amp envelope, we can use the decay knob to control the release. So I have to put it on 1 and 2. And now we can use the release for the filter envelope. Lastly, let's have a look at the switch down here, the LFO gate switch. When this is engaged, then the LFO triggers the amp envelope. If you want to use filter modulation with that as well, you have to keep your keys pressed. Let's set up some modulation. Let's have a look at the LFO section now. In the SE-02 you can use the LFO to modulate the pitch and the filter. So this knob, as we've already seen, adjusts the LFO frequency rate, essentially how fast or slow the LFO changes. And down here we have the oscillator knob, which adjusts the depth to which the LFO affects the oscillator. So by playing with this knob, we modulate the pitch of the oscillator with the LFO. Next to that, we've got the filter knob, which adjusts the depth to which the LFO affects the filter. So if I bring the filter down a bit, I can adjust it with this knob and the LFO. And of course, we've got the wave knob. So here you can choose the waves you can use for the LFO to shape the sound. Well, let's have a listen. Let's go back to sine wave. Now we've got some switches down here, so let's go from right to left. That's sync, synchronization. We'll talk about this later when we talk about sync. Next to that, we've got mode. So there are 3 modes for the LFO. Right now it's on free mode. That means it's running free, independently, without restarting each time I press a key. So let me set it up again. So no matter what I play, it runs independently. If I put it on key, it will start every time I press a key. It's a bit more consistent if that's what you're after, and then all the way up to 1x or 1 time. The LFO will only be applied once every time I press the note, and then it will stop. But the note will continue without continuous LFO modulation. So. Now, the last 2 switches have to do with the mod wheel. Before we go into this, we'll take a look at the mod wheel mix knob. So in the control section, right above the value knob, we have the mod wheel mix knob. This controls the mix between the cross modulation XMOD, and the LFO when you use the mod wheel of your keyboard to control the modulation. So all the way to the right, the mod wheel only controls the XMOD. All the way to the left, the mod wheel will only control the LFO by the amount we set with these switches. Now in the middle, it's a mixture of 50% each. Now more specifically, let's put all the way to the right. Let's start with the oscillator. The oscillator switch controls how strong the effect of modulating the pitch with the mod wheel is. So off, it has no effect. H stands for half, and then F, and H, the effect is applied weakly, and F stands for full, and the effect is applied strongly. Let's leave it at F and see how it behaves. Let's take the LFO oscillator and filter down so we only listen to that. And now I'm going to use my modulation mod wheel to control it. Same thing apply, same thing for the filter. Let's put on full. Of course, you can have both of them running at the same time and in different switches. So we can have the oscillator at half and filter at full. Let's have a look at the sides now. Let's start with the control. This knob here controls the time of the glide effect. So the more you turn to the right, the more it takes to glide the next note. Think of the glide as portamento if you play an instrument. But we have to turn it on first. So on off, there is no glide effect. EXP stands for exponential and lin stands for linear. Now linear functions change at a constant rate per unit interval, and exponential functions change by common ratio over common equal intervals. Do you need to know all of that? Absolutely no. You just need to know how they sound. Now, linear mode is using a linear curve to glide between the notes. The exponential mode is closer to what the human ear perceives as a more musical glide. And exponential is faster than linear and a bit smoother too. Of course, you can go to extremes. Now let's have a look at the delay all the way to the left side, which is the only digital part of the synthesizer. Now, this knob adjusts the delay time. Region adjusts the number of times the delay is repeated, and amount is simply the volume of the delay. Now, when it's all the way to the left on dry, the no delayed signal goes to the output of the synth, no matter if these two knobs are up. Of course, there are many more uses for a delay. You can create unique sounds using this effect here. For example, let's say, let's turn it up, high region and short time, for example, will create this cool effect. Oh, and if you use the cutoff and gauge the cutoff as well, it can almost sound like tuned percussion. And for those that come from the mixing world and love their slap delay instead of reverb, you can create that effect here as well. As in a slap delay, you need to have a very small time amount. So let's put the region a bit higher. A small amount of time, and let's have a listen now without first. So right now it sounds like it has a slap delay on it. Okay, now let's have a look at XMOD or cross modulation. Cross modulation is when you use one oscillator to modulate the parameter on another oscillator. Now the first knob here, O2 filter, sets the amount of oscillator 2 modulating the filter cutoff. That means that when I change anything on oscillator 2, that will affect the filter cutoff frequency, and will start to modulate according to anything that I do here. And it doesn't even have to be up on the mixer, so I'm going to turn oscillator 2 down and just leave oscillator 1 running. Take the filter cutoff a bit. Okay, let's try this. Now the second knob, O302, is oscillator 3 modulating the waveform of oscillator 2. I'll turn oscillator 1 down for this, and I'll just leave 2. I don't even need 3. So it's now just oscillator 2 up. Now, the waveform I have selected here on oscillator 2 will change according to what oscillator 3 is set to. Let's leave keyboard tracking on. Now the third knob is one of the two ways you can do pulse width modulation in the SE-02. Now if you are on the latest version, there is also another way of doing this, which we'll look in a bit. So this knob controls the depth of oscillator 3, modulating the pulse width of oscillator 1 or 2, or both of them together. But in order for it to work, you need to have your oscillator to one of the pulse waves, otherwise it doesn't work. So one of the 3 right ones. Now let's put oscillator 1 in square wave and just leave 1 up and turn down 2 so you can hear the effect better. Of course, you can have both of them at the same time and in different waves, different pulse waves. Right, let's take this one down. Now, for the other way, you can do pulse width modulation in the SE-02, which is a bit more precise. Now, while we're in patch mode, which we already are, press the first 2 buttons together, comp and play. Then this will light up. Now, step 7 will allow you to change the LFO pulse width modulation rate, and step 8 will allow you to change the LFO pulse width modulation depth. Let's turn up the rate and then have a listen. To exit, simply press exit. Lastly, we need to have a look at the mod wheel controlling the cross modulation. Now, if you remember from earlier, I can have the mod wheel mix knob all the way to the left to control the LFO. If I put it all the way to the right, then it will control the depth of the cross modulation that I choose. And the way that I choose which cross modulation I want to control is by this switch here. As you can see, it says A, B, C. And next to the XMOD knobs, you've got letters A, B, and C. Now, one more thing is that in order for this to work, you have to go all the way to the LFO section and either put the oscillator switch in half or full. Otherwise, it will not work. Now, I will demonstrate both methods so you can see that it sounds exactly the same. Let's try it first without the mod wheel. Let's go on A. And with the mod wheel. Let's try B. And with the mod wheel. And let's do the pulse. Okay, let's say you have created a sound that you really like and you want to save that. You can save it in the user bank. To do that, simply press the value knob. The screen will start blinking with the number. Now, you can save all the way up to 128 presets. So you can either scroll and choose the number that you want, or you can simply type it in. Let's say I want 56, so I'll just type 56. When you find the one you want, press the value knob again and it'll ask you, are you sure? If you don't want to save it, press exit. If you want to save it, press the value knob again. Will blink, and now every time that I go to the user bank, 56 will always be this sound. Let's try it. So I can just type it in, user bank 56, my sound will always be there. Okay, let's have a look at the presets now. So far, we have been in manual mode. To access the presets, we still have to be in patch mode, but deactivate manual mode by pressing here. Now we have 4 banks of 128 presets each, and then a user bank that we have already mentioned. To choose any bank from A to C, simply click on the number, and to choose bank D, which comes with the latest updates, simply click on A twice. And you know you're in bank D because the button is blinking. Now when you choose a bank, the screen tells you what preset number you have. You can either use the value knob to scroll through them, or simply just type it in. Let's say that I want bank A preset 67, so I just press 67 and now we have that preset. Now, as you may have noticed, there is modulation happening in the preset, but the sound we're hearing does not reflect the settings of the synth. So I can hear that modulation trigger is off in the preset, but here it's on. There is also filter modulation happening, but we have no filter modulation. So the preset does not follow what's happening up here, but you can change any parameter that you want. Let's have a look at that. Let's turn modulation trigger on. Take the cutoff down, add some feedback and noise. Now you know you have made changes to the preset because this little dot appears next to the number. Now if you want to compare the new sound you've created with the original preset, simply press on compare. To go back, press compare again. To save it, say you like the sound, you want to save it, it's the exact same procedure as before. Press on the value knob, it will start blinking. Choose what number you want to save it at. Let's say I want to save this at 35. Press the value knob again. It'll ask you, are you sure? Press it again, and now user bank preset 35 will always be that one. Okay, let's have a look at the other buttons now. Okay, let's use that. When you press play, the step sequencer becomes the keyboard. So the orange keys are the white keys, and the pinkish keys are the black keys. Next to that, we've got the transpose options. So you can transpose by an octave. At an octave, the button is staying lit. At 2 octaves, the button starts blinking slowly. And at 3 octaves, the button starts blinking faster. To reset it, just press both of them together at the same time. Now, if you want to transpose by a different interval, hold down transpose and then press either up or down to transpose by semitone. And you can see how many semitones you have transposed on the screen. And to go back, simply hold transpose and press both of them together, and you go back to 0.